Hello, welcome to our conversation with Suneel Gupta, author of Backable, The Surprising Truth around behind what makes people take a chance on you. Hi, I'm Hayes Ferguson. I am director of the Farley Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, or as we sometimes say, Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Northwestern University. I'm pleased to be co-hosting this event with The Garage and to have the opportunity for Suneel to talk about his book and the idea that success isn't defined by talent or connections, but by the ability to convince people to back you. Welcome, Suneel. Suneel, by the way, is a Northwestern MBA and JD alumnus. He's also the founder of a nutrition coaching app called Rise Labs and is on the faculty at Harvard. Suneel's ideas have been backed by firms including Greylock and Google Ventures, and he has invested in startups such as Airbnb, Calm, and SpaceX. He also serves as an emissary for gross national happiness between the United States and the Kingdom of Bhutan. We're really thrilled to have him here. He's been very busy talking to the likes of, well, he can mention who he's been on the podcast circuit for sure, but it's an honor for him to go from speaking with Deepak Chopra and Kate Hudson to us. So again, a very warm welcome to Suneel. Before I turn the mic over to him, I want to let the audience know that Suneel will be answering questions at the end of the talk today around 12:50 p.m. Central. Please send your questions directly to the Farley Center in the chat section of your screen. I also want to congratulate the first 50 Northwestern students who registered and attended this event. You will receive the free Kindle code to download Suneel's book, Backable, in your email inboxes in the next few days. It's my pleasure now to turn over the mic to Suneel, who will begin today's conversation.
All right. Well, thank you, Hayes, and thank you to everybody who helped organize and for everybody here. It's going to be a fun discussion. As Hayes mentioned, the title of the book is Backable, and it's all about how do we make people, convince people to take a chance on us. And I got really excited about this topic for a few reasons, but mainly I think that when people write a book, they tend to write it either because they have a solution or they have a problem. For me, I definitely had a problem, which was that I finished up the Northwestern program, the JD MBA program, and I had spent a few years working in technology and decided to go work on my own company, a company called Rise, which was a one-on-one nutrition coaching company. And I was out there raising money. This was in the Bay Area, and I was not having any luck. I was getting rejected by investor after investor, and I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. Around this time, I received a phone call from the organizer of a conference called FailCon, which literally it stands for Failure Conference. And it's a humbling experience when you receive a phone call from someone who says, "Hey, I'm organizing a conference on failure, and we would love for you to be the keynote speaker." At the time, I had started a couple of companies that had gone nowhere, and I guess I had accumulated this track record for failure, and they wanted me to be their keynote speaker. And so I agreed. And I didn't know when I was up there on stage that there was a reporter from the New York Times in the audience. So fast forward to a full-length article on failure, and my face is literally the cover of this article. Now, this is 2013, and right around that time is when failure started to become a topic that was getting discussed, especially in the entrepreneurial world. And the article goes viral. It went so viral that there was a period of time where if you Googled failure, you would have seen my face as one of your top search results. And so when something like that happens, clearly embarrassing, when something like that happens, you kind of have two options. You can either sort of kind of put your head in the sand, or you can embrace it. And a friend of mine convinced me to embrace it. And the way that I did that is by starting to cold call people who I hadn't had any luck getting in touch with. People I admired but didn't know. And what I would do is I would send them a link to this article. And I would say clearly, as you can see from this article, I don't know what I'm doing, but I would love your advice. Would you be willing to grab coffee with me? Or would you be willing to jump on the phone with me? And it was amazing to me how many people actually responded to that email. It was a hit rate that I had never seen before. And that opened the door to not only conversations that I wouldn't have had, but open and honest conversations that I wouldn't have had. Because typically the way that it works is, especially when you're networking or you're trying to meet people, these conversations can be sort of shrouded around success. You're sort of boasting about your resume or what you want to build. But in this case, the conversation was about failure. And that, I think, sort of made it okay for them to kind of open up to me about their failures and their mistakes. And what I kind of realized was two things. One is that the version of people that we admire, the version that we see today, wasn't always the version that they were. In fact, it very rarely is. Most people who we consider to be naturals are very rarely naturals. They're the product of lots and lots of mistakes, lots of practice, lots of setbacks. And we'll get into that. But the second thing, which is kind of what led me into writing this book and having now spent the past 5 years doing it, is that creativity and persuasion are two different skills. But oftentimes we kind of think about them as one. So we assume that if a product or an idea is not described well, well, then it's not a good idea. But that's not the case. And in fact, as a result of that, we miss out on a lot of the great innovation that we could potentially have, or we get it later than we actually should. And just a quick example of that is penicillin. Penicillin was invented in the 1920s. And if you looked at the way that sort of the world was at that time, there are a lot of similarities to what we're going through right now with the pandemic. Hundreds of thousands, close to millions of people were dying every year from infection of their wounds. And there was literally nothing in a medical person's toolkit to help them. So when Dr. Alexander Fleming invented penicillin, he was like, I've got the cure. I've got it in my hands. And he went out and he did what I think any of us would do. He started to pitch people who could give him the resources to make it a reality. But the problem was that Dr. Alexander Fleming was a brilliant scientist, but he wasn't really good at convincing people that he had the answer. He wasn't very good at rallying people around his idea. And as a result of that, he was dismissed by investors for the next 10 years. So over the next 10 years, we were in a world where we actually had a cure, but we let hundreds of thousands of people die every year from something that could have been avoided. To date, penicillin has saved nearly 200 million lives, and it's something that almost never existed. So this all got me interested in the idea of backable people. And the way I think about backable people are folks who are able to get into a room and they're able to convince us to take a chance on them. So the trick of it is, they may not be the obvious choice for a role. They may not have an obvious idea, but we still feel compelled to want to rally around them. We still feel compelled to want to bet on them. And I wanted to understand, like, what is that quality? I needed it because I had this idea that I felt like could help a lot of people around nutrition and health, but no one was biting. So what was I doing wrong? And so what I decided to do was I decided to start spending time studying hundreds of backable people, using that New York Times article as sort of a foray, as a way in. And that led me to hundreds of conversations with people across different industries, from Oscar-winning filmmakers to Michelin star chefs, to founders of iconic companies, to leaders inside big companies, to military leaders. And what I realized is that there are a set of qualities that I think any of us can follow to make ourselves more backable. And what's beyond that is that being backable is not just for celebrities or CEOs, because no matter what kind of change we're trying to create in the world, whether that be with our community, whether that be with our companies, whether that be with our relationships, we need people to take a chance on us. That could be a hiring manager, that could be a team, that could be even friends and family. But we never make change doing it alone. There's always someone who needs to sort of take a flyer and come along with us. And so what are those qualities? Well, the book sort of gets into 7 high-level qualities, and we have a short conversation today. So I thought what I would do is maybe talk about 1 or 2 of those qualities, and then we'll kind of open it up for discussion. I can't wait to hear your questions. So the first quality in the book is to convince yourself first. Convince yourself first. So what do we mean by that? Well, one of the things I expected to find when I started writing Backable was that I expected that I was going to see Backable people have a certain style of communication to them. They were going to have a certain way of using hand gestures and eye contact and pacing. That could not have been further from the truth. You certainly had some people who are much more extroverted and gregarious. They felt like they could come out of a Dale Carnegie training or a Toastmasters club. But I would say the majority of Backable people that I studied did not have classic communication styles. In fact, many of them were more shy. They were more introverted. And if you want just a quick example of that, look at the number one most popular TED Talk of all time. And if you go look that up, what you'll find is actually a very un-TED-like presentation. It's given by a guy named Sir Ken Robinson. It's a brilliant, brilliant talk, but it's not sort of the poster child for charisma or what we've come to expect from sort of TED presentations. He's got one hand in his pocket. He sort of meanders on and off script. He stands with a bit of a slouch, and yet you believe every word that he is saying. What I found is that it's not charisma that makes a person convincing, it's conviction. Backable people take the time to convince themselves first, and then they let that conviction shine through whatever style it is that feels most natural to them. So oftentimes, and you may have found this to be the case, you might be with a group of friends, or you might be in a classroom, you might be with colleagues, and an idea hits you, an idea strikes. And we all get that impulse where we're like, we need to share this idea immediately. And so we do. And then we look around and we realize that no one is quite as excited about the idea as we are. And so it's a deflating experience. It can be soul crushing when that happens. One of the things we found when we were writing this book is that the majority of good ideas inside big companies don't get killed inside the conference room. They don't get killed inside formal meetings. They actually get killed inside casual conversations, inside the hallways, around water coolers. Because what happens is we share the idea, we don't get the response we're looking for, and we kind of put it in a mental drawer and we walk away. Happens all the time. So what Backable people tend to do is they almost do this little very quick decision tree in their head before they share an idea. And the decision tree is, do I have high conviction for this idea, or do I have low conviction for this idea? You can almost think of it as, is this a peanut M&M or is this a chocolate M&M? A peanut M&M is not a piece of steel. It's a new idea, so it's not rock solid, but you can squeeze it a little bit and it's not going to crack immediately. But a chocolate M&M, if you squeeze it, it cracks immediately, right? So if it's a peanut M&M, Backable people will say, well, let me share the idea right now because there's no time like the present. I can actually defend it. I can have a back and forth on it. But if it's a chocolate M&M, if it's a brand new idea, haven't really thought about it thoroughly, Backable people tend to sort of resist that temptation to share the idea. And they take what we call in the book incubation time. Incubation time, where they really give themselves the time to nurture an idea. Now, there are a couple of things to know about incubation time. There are all different ways that someone can incubate an idea. Some people like to draw out their idea. Some people like to talk out their idea. Me personally, I'm a writer. I like to write out my idea. But there's a couple of things to sort of keep in mind as you think about incubation time. The first is that let yourself wander as much as you possibly can, especially in the early stages of an idea. What we found tends to happen for people who come up with great new ideas is sometimes you can fall in love with a solution, but what Backable people tend to do is fall in love with a problem and not a solution. So what that means practically is as you're starting to really think about something new and really get it down on paper and starting to build your conviction, allow yourself to wander a little bit. Sometimes our mind will want to take us in a different direction. But if we fall in love with the solution too early, we'll resist that. And we'll say, no, that doesn't fit the solution. So let me just stay focused on this. It was an interesting study done by IDEO, where IDEO, what they do often is they'll have their sort of clients come into a room. And clients will often come in with thinking they know the solution. And what some of the folks at IDEO will sometimes say is, well, why don't we come up with 8 alternatives to that solution and just see what happens. And typically the client will resist. They're like, no, we already have the answer here. And they'll say, yeah, but let's just take 15 minutes. Let's just do a 15-minute brainstorm and come up with 8 alternatives to the idea. And they go through this exercise, and what they almost always find is that when people challenge themselves to come up with 8 alternatives to their own idea, again, falling in love with the problem, but not the solution, they'll find one of those alternatives they like even more. And so again, allowing yourself to meander, allowing yourself to wander a little bit during this incubation period is really important. The second thing is to put on what I call your critic hat. So oftentimes we really fall in love with a problem or an idea, and we talk about why it's exciting, right? And we want to write about what's exciting about it. Why is this promising? Why is this great? And that's good. We should do that. But at some point in time, before we get into a room, what we need to do is take off that hat, and we need to put on our critic hat, where what we're talking about is what are the 2 to 3 main objections? What are the 2 to 3 anticipated things that we think people are going to push on? And then answer those as well. Now, you might not have perfect answers to that, and that's okay. If you did have perfect answers, it probably wouldn't be a new idea. But just being able to have the back and forth with yourself first, where you can anticipate what that pushback is going to be, and then what your answers might be, builds conviction so that you can walk into a room and have a back and forth. Because here's the thing, backable moments are very, very rarely are they monologues. You don't walk into an interview, give your resume, drop the mic and leave. It's a series of back and forths. It's Q&A. You want to be able to get comfortable with that Q&A. And we can talk about that a little bit more too, because it's a really, really important point. The third thing that to keep in mind when it comes to conviction, though, building conviction, is to set an end date for your incubation time. You don't want to be one of these people that's incubating an idea forever. At the same time, you want to give yourself enough time. So one of the things that I found that backable people tend to do is they tend to set an end date for their incubation time with a friendly person. So what they'll do is they'll call up a friend and say, hey, look, 3 weeks from now, I'd love to set up a Zoom conversation with you where I share an idea. Can we carve out some time? And typically the friend will say something like, yeah, what's this idea all about? And what you need to do in that moment is to resist that temptation for all the reasons we discussed before. Resist that temptation and say, you know what, I can't share the idea right now, but 3 weeks from now, I will. Now something's on your calendar, and you have a little bit of external pressure to really incubate this, to start getting the ideas down on paper or drawing or whatever it is that you need to do. One of the people that I profile in the book is Lady Gaga. And when I talked to the producers that really backed Lady Gaga, these producers had backed her after she had been dumped by Def Jam Records. And, she was living on her grandmother's couch at the time. And her father and her had made a deal. And her father's deal with her is, look, this doesn't seem to be working, but let's take 1 year. Let's give you 1 year to really pursue this dream. And if it doesn't, then I want you to enroll back in college and finish college before you go back into music. And that was the deal they had. And just having that pressure, just having that sort of timeline and end date to this incubation period brought Lady Gaga into focus. And if you talk to a lot of the producers that really backed her in those days, that's one of the things that they admired about her the most, was this sense of urgency, this sense of focus. She wasn't just meandering at this point. She was really pulling herself into a sense of, I've got to get this done, in time. But at the same time, enough time where she was able to really incubate her dreams and figure out what worked for her. So convince yourself first before you try to convince others, because if you don't believe, then they can't believe. So with that, Hayes, I'll turn it back over to you. And I know we've got about 10 minutes left, and I'd love to just open it up to discussion.
That would be great. And I think Melissa from the garage is standing by with some questions. Melissa, are you there?
I'm here. I am here with one of the first copies of the book too.
All right. I'm
very excited to have the real physical book in my office. So thank you for joining us. I know that was the Cliff Notes version of some of your takeaways from your book. I'm really excited for some of the students on this call to receive a copy after this meeting, but we have a couple of questions from the audience. The first is, how can college students with less experience or traction inspire confidence?
Great question. One of the things that I think sticks with me probably more than any other concept in the book, is this notion of an earned secret. And let me tell you a little bit more about that. One of the people that I profiled in the book is a Hollywood producer named Brian Grazer. And Brian Grazer is, he's interesting for a couple of reasons. He's won like over 130 Emmys, dozens of Oscars, but he also invests in companies and he runs large teams. And so he's sort of backing people across all these different dimensions. And I was sitting in this is pre-COVID, I'm sitting in his studio lobby waiting to meet with him. And there are all these people there, and you could just tell that they're really sort of nervous. Everybody's there to pitch him for a different reason. And so when I went back to meet him, I said to him, Brian, look, you got a pretty anxious room full of people out there. If I could go out there and give them one piece of advice, what would that be? And he thinks about that for a moment. He says, give me something that I can't easily find on Google. Give me something that is not easily Googleable. And I thought that was fascinating because as I started to meet with more and more backers, more and more decision makers, this theme continued to come up, which is that great presentations, great pitches, great interviews that build confidence tend to be based on an insight that person went out into the field, went beyond Google, went from behind their desk into the field and did something unusual to gather an insight. And then they brought that insight into the room. So when Brian Chesky was starting Airbnb, he was actually sleeping on people's couches and renting out his own place. When Leah Busky started TaskRabbit, she was actually cleaning people's homes. Logan Green was one of Lyft's first drivers. They're actually putting themselves into the story. In all three of those cases, they did not have an entrepreneurial track record, but they were putting themselves into the story enough to be able to pull these earned secrets into the room, these earned insights that went beyond Google. And it's not just for people who are starting companies. The other day, I was talking to somebody who was, re-entering the workforce now as we're starting to kind of pull a little bit out of the pandemic. And she's looking for jobs, and she's a mom, and she's trying to figure this out. And one of the companies that she was really interested in was a social media company that she didn't actually use the product. She had never actually used the product, but she was very interested in the role. And so what she did was she interviewed every single one of her daughter's friends. She called every one of them up and said, what do you like about the experience? What do you not like? What are these moments of joy? And then she did something really clever. She had them send her screenshots of their experience. So now she goes on to this interview. It's over Zoom. And she has this gallery of screenshots on her phone where she's now bringing these insights into this interview, even though she was not somebody previously who would even use the product. This hiring manager was so impressed that not only did she get the job, but right in the middle of the interview, he actually patched in one of the UX designers to take a look at some of the things that she had found, some of these insights. So talking to customers, obviously, talking to competitors' customers, attending obscure meetups, test driving products that maybe other people wouldn't test. All these things that you can do to go out and gather an insight that other people might not gather, something that's unique, and then bringing that insight into an interview, into a presentation, into a pitch, really is a great way to build confidence.
That's great. I mean, I love that your book is not specifically about entrepreneurship, but so many of the entrepreneurial lessons that our students are learning in the classroom at the garage are coming through in what you're saying. So we're really big promoters of, getting off of campus, talking to real people, being the first customers of your own product. It's a lot of wisdom. We have another question, and you talked about this a little bit, but as students, how do you know how much focus to give to an idea to come off as backable and convicted when they don't have the time to work full time on their idea? So when you don't have time to drive for Lyft all day as your first driver, how do you balance school and some of the principles you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, one thing I should say is in all three of those cases, they were not doing that full time. That was not their full-time thing. All three of them had other roles, and they were doing it part-time. And and I think that's difficult. Let me just say that right off the bat. I have started companies while having a full-time role, and I know how difficult that can be. I started actually my first company when I was at Northwestern, and I was doing that on the side, and that's difficult, and that's tough. The thing that I would say is sometimes there's the temptation then to sort of take the shortcut of like, let me get this done in a short period of time. And as a result of that, let me cut that part out. Let me instead spend time, getting a great slide deck together, for example, right? And I've certainly been in a situation where I have felt like putting a lot of time into polished slides, great looking slides was the way to go. And what I've realized over time is that it's not the right way to go. It is much better to go out and have those conversations and build conviction in your idea, and have a sloppy slide deck than the other way around, or I should say an unpolished slide deck than the other way around. Because if you don't have that conviction, if you haven't had those conversations, no matter whether you're having 10 of those conversations a week or you're having one of those conversations a week, but if you haven't had those conversations, if you haven't done that type of legwork, then no slide is fancy enough, no communication tool is good enough, I think, to save that. Now, on the other hand, if you've gone out and you've done that kind of legwork and you can bring that type of story into the room, you can talk about what you've done and the insights you've earned, then I think it's okay that you haven't spent as much time on, pulling together polished slides, because I think that you can actually end up opening it up to a Q&A that ends up becoming a confidence builder. I've seen that work over and over again. So again, short on time means prioritization. Prioritization means figuring out what's more important than the other. Don't make polishing slides that most important thing. Make talking to customers that most important thing.
That's great. I couldn't agree with you more, both in the entrepreneurial context, but also in the job hunting context of, the way I think about it is, you always want to leave the party that you're interviewing with, that you've taught them something, right? So what can you bring to the table, not just answering their questions, but really adding value to the organization, regardless of if you end up getting hired or not. So that's a key takeaway for our students. I hope you guys will think about that. Suneel, we're down to the last 90 seconds. I'm going to turn it back over to you for a wrap up.
Okay, great. Well, hey, thank you everybody again. I just want to say, I've got two daughters now, and we do a little routine every morning, and that routine is that I ask them two questions, and I ask them, what is the meaning of life? And they say, to find your gift. And I ask, well, what is the purpose of life? And they say, to give it away. To find your gift and to give it away. And it's a quote that we learned from Picasso. We've turned it into a little game. But I think Backable is really about, how do we give our gift away? How do we take this unused creativity that so many of us have, these ideas that we have tucked away somewhere, and how do we share them with the world? And what I have found is that there are three words that tend to hold us back. And those three words are, I'm not ready. Now, I'm not ready to run with that idea. I'm not ready to speak my mind. I'm not ready to step into that leadership role. But the thing that I would want to leave you with today, if I could only leave you with one thing, is that I've now spent time with hundreds of extraordinary people. And what I realized is that there is one common denominator, which is that none of them were really ready. Like 3 friends from design school were not ready to start Airbnb. A mid-level talent manager wasn't ready to start SoulCycle. A 15-year-old from Stockholm, Sweden wasn't ready to build an environmental movement. But today, Greta Thunberg is Time Magazine's youngest person of the year. And don't get me wrong, there were setbacks, there were failures along the way, but I think every one of them seemed to adopt some version of the same mantra, which is that the opposite of success is not failure. It's boredom. So let's work on the ideas that really make us come alive. And let's find good people to join us along the way. Because if no one has told you this, then let me be the first. You are ready. So thank you so much.